The blood was still pounding in my temples when I saw the red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. Shit. It was almost 9 at night, and I was coming back from a shoot at the port that had run longer than planned. The golden sunset light over the docks had been too irresistible to leave before I captured the perfect sequence. Now, with my Canon still on the passenger seat and the speedometer hovering 20 kilometers over the limit, I was about to get my first ticket in 3 years. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this one. I pulled the Civic over on Atlantic Avenue, cutting the engine while I mentally sorted through the excuses I could use. Photo assignment, tight deadline, anything that sounded remotely professional. Through the side mirror, I watched the officer get out of his cruiser, tall, broad shoulders filling out the navy blue uniform in a way that made me quickly look away. Focus, Marcus. Be polite, take the ticket, and go home. The taps on the window were accompanied by a flashlight, even though the streetlights were bright enough. I rolled down the window, preparing my most harmless smile. Good evening. License and registration, please. The voice was softer than I expected from someone with that kind of physical presence. I handed over my license and the car's registration, taking the moment to discreetly study the officer's face. A square jaw, eyes that seemed grayish-blue even under the artificial streetlight, and a serious expression that couldn't completely hide something that looked like curiosity when his eyes landed on the camera gear on the seat next to me. What you're hearing is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Marcus Thompson, he read aloud, looking over my license. Occupation: photographer. It wasn't a question, but there was an inflection in his voice that suggested interest. I risked a reply. Freelancer. I was just coming back from a job at the port. He lifted his eyes from the documents, and for a moment our gazes met directly. There was something different there. Not the impersonal hardness I expected from a routine traffic stop, but a kind of recognition, as if he knew the territory I had just mentioned. Boston Harbor? What kind of work do you do there? The question caught me off guard. Most cops would have ticketed me and sent me on my way in 5 minutes, but this one seemed genuinely interested. I relaxed slightly in my seat. Urban photography. I mostly capture the quieter moments, sunrise, sunset, when the traffic dies down and the light gets more interesting. He nodded, his gaze returning to the camera on the passenger seat. That's a nice camera. Canon 5D? My surprise must have been obvious, because he smiled for the first time. A small, almost shy smile that completely transformed his face. My name is Ryan Williams, he said, extending his hand through the window. Sorry about the protocol, but I have to follow the procedure first. I shook his hand, noticing how firm and warm it was, with calluses that spoke of regular physical work. There was something comforting in that contact, an unexpected human connection in the middle of a situation that was supposed to be purely bureaucratic. You know camera gear? I asked, genuinely curious. Ryan hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much he should reveal. A little. I've always been interested, but I've never really had the time to explore that area. He paused, looking at the camera again. Can I see the pictures you took today, if it's not too much trouble? The request was so unexpected that it took me a few seconds to process. A cop wanting to see my work? This was definitely not in the normal script for a speeding ticket. Sure, I replied, grabbing the camera and turning on the LCD screen. But you'll have to get closer to see it properly. Ryan walked over to the passenger side and leaned in through the window, his face now just inches from mine as I scrolled through the day's images. I could smell the clean scent of his soap mixed with something that was distinctly his, manly, but not aggressive. His hands, when they touched mine to get a better grip on the camera, were surprisingly gentle for someone of his build. This one is impressive, he commented, pointing to a shot where a lone fisherman was preparing his nets against the golden backdrop of the setting sun. You managed to capture something I see every day, but I've never really paid attention to. You spend a lot of time at the port? I do regular patrols there. It's an area that needs constant supervision, but he hesitated again. It's also one of the most beautiful places in the city, especially in the early morning. There was something in his voice that suggested more than just a professional interest in the place. I kept showing him the photos, noticing how he lingered on each image, making sharp comments about composition and light that revealed a more trained eye than he had initially let on. You have real talent, he finally said, handing the camera back. His hand brushed against mine again during the handoff, and this time I'm sure it wasn't accidental. It's refreshing to see someone who finds beauty in the details most people ignore. We stood in silence for a few seconds, the moment stretching beyond what would be normal for a traffic stop. I knew I should say something, break the tension that was building. But there was something magnetic about the situation. An attractive cop showing genuine interest in my work, sharing a moment of unexpected vulnerability in the middle of Boston's nightly hustle. "Look," Ryan said finally, returning to a more formal posture. "Technically, I should give you a ticket for speeding, but—" He looked around, as if making sure there were no witnesses. "How about we call this a warning? Just drive more carefully, especially coming back from the port. That area can be dangerous at night." "Really?" I asked, unable to hide the relief in my voice. "As long as you promise me one thing," he continued, and there was something different in his tone now. Less official, more personal. "If you go back there to shoot, especially early in the morning, well, I usually start my patrols around 6. If you're there, maybe we could continue this conversation about photography." The suggestion hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities that neither of us was fully prepared to put into words. There was something happening there that went beyond a simple professional interaction, but we were also two adult men navigating unknown territory, testing boundaries without being sure where they actually were. "I usually get there around 5:30, I replied, keeping my tone casual despite my racing heart. "To catch the sunrise light. If you want, it would be interesting to get the perspective of someone who knows the area as well as you do." Ryan smiled again, this time more openly, and I could see how it made him look younger, less intimidating. "Then maybe I'll see you there," he said, taking a step back from the window. "Drive safe, Marcus." The way he said my name, with a familiarity that shouldn't exist between strangers, did a funny thing to my stomach. I started the car, waved out the window, and pulled away slowly, watching in my rearview mirror as Ryan returned to his cruiser. The whole way home, I couldn't stop thinking about the interaction. Had it just been professional courtesy? Genuine interest in photography? Or was there something deeper happening there? A connection that we both felt, but neither was ready to name. That night, lying in bed in my North End apartment, surrounded by my own photographs on the walls, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan's grayish-blue eyes, felt the warmth of his hands on mine again, heard his voice saying my name with that unexpected intimacy. It was almost 3 in the morning when I finally admitted to myself that I was looking forward to going back to the docks. Not just for the photographs, though the morning light there was truly spectacular, but for the chance to see Ryan again, to find out if that connection had been real or just a product of my lonely imagination. The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, but I had been awake for an hour, organizing my gear and trying to pick out clothes that looked casual but not sloppy. Ridiculous, I knew, but I couldn't help it. It had been months since someone had shown real interest in my work, and even longer since I had felt genuinely attracted to someone. The port was shrouded in the typical morning fog when I arrived, an ethereal atmosphere that always made the first hours of the day magical for shooting. I set up my equipment on the main pier, pretending to be completely absorbed in my work, while my ears stayed alert for any approaching sound. It was 6:15 when I heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind me. My heart sped up, but I forced myself not to turn around immediately, continuing to adjust my camera settings until the familiar voice broke the morning silence. "Good morning, Marcus." This time, when I turned around, Ryan was in his full uniform, but there was something different about his posture. Less stiff, more relaxed. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from a nearby diner. "I figured you could use some caffeine," he said, offering me one of the cups. "You seem to be up pretty early." "Thanks," I replied, accepting the coffee and noticing how our fingers briefly touched during the exchange. "Actually, I rarely sleep much. I've always been a bit of a night owl, so waking up early to shoot isn't a big sacrifice." "I get it. I've worked rotating shifts for so long that my body clock has kind of given up on having a normal pattern." We walked side by side along the pier, with me occasionally stopping to capture an interesting composition, while Ryan watched in silence. There was something comforting about his presence. He didn't try to direct my attention or make suggestions, just tagged along, offering insightful comments when I showed him a particularly interesting shot. "You've been doing this for a long time?" he asked after I'd captured a sequence of seagulls flying against the orange sky. "Professionally, about 5 years, but I've always loved photography. I started when I was in college, communications major, but I found out I'd rather be behind the camera than behind a desk." "And your family? Do they support that career choice?" The question caught me off guard, mainly because there was a genuine sincerity to it that suggested real interest in my life, not just polite conversation. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 22, I replied, surprised by my own honesty. It wasn't something I usually shared with strangers, but there was something about Ryan that made me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. Since then, I've basically built my life on my own. Photography. Well, it gives me a purpose, you know? A way to capture permanent beauty in a world that can change so quickly. Ryan stopped walking and looked at me directly, his eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond casual sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and there was a sincerity in his voice that made me believe he really meant it. "It must have been hard to rebuild everything on your own." "What about you?" I asked, wanting to shift the focus of the conversation. "Big family? Always wanted to be a cop?" A shadow passed quickly over Ryan's face, so fast I almost missed it. "Traditional Irish family from Southie. My dad was a police captain for 25 years, 2 older brothers are cops too. Let's just say my career path was kind of predetermined." There was something in his voice that suggested not everything in that family story was a source of pride. But before I could ask more questions, his radio started crackling with static, followed by a dispatcher's voice calling all units to an incident on the other side of town. "Shit," he muttered, checking his watch. "I have to go." We walked quickly back to where our vehicles were parked, the relaxed atmosphere of the last 40 minutes suddenly replaced by professional urgency. "Marcus," he said when we got to the cars, I really enjoyed our conversation. If you don't mind, I'd like to do this again. Maybe not necessarily here at the port. I mean, my supervisor might start to find it strange that I spend so much time in this specific area." My heart did a little jump. Was he suggesting we meet outside of his professional context? "Do you have a place in mind?" Ryan hesitated, clearly trying to phrase something that wouldn't compromise his professional position. "There's a cafe in the North End, near the Old North Church. Cafe Paradiso. Do you know it?" I knew it well. It was 3 blocks from my apartment. "Yeah, I know it. How about tomorrow after my shift, around 7 in the evening?" "Perfect," I replied, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. Ryan smiled, that genuine smile that completely transformed his face. And for a moment I completely forgot that he was a cop, that there were rules and protocols and potential complications. He was just Ryan, an interesting man who wanted to spend more time with me. "See you tomorrow then," he said, getting into his cruiser. "See you tomorrow, Ryan." I stood in the parking lot, watching the patrol car's lights disappear into the morning fog, with the strange feeling that my life had just taken a completely unexpected turn. In less than 24 hours, a simple traffic ticket had turned into, well, I still didn't know exactly what it had turned into, but it was definitely something I wanted to explore. The rest of that day passed in a haze of productive anxiety. I edited the morning's photos, answered client emails, organized my apartment twice, and changed my outfit 3 times before finally settling on dark jeans and a blue shirt that brought out my eyes. At 6:30 the next evening, I was sitting in Cafe Paradiso, pretending to read a book while nervously watching every person who came in. Ryan arrived at 7 on the dot, wearing civilian clothes for the first time I'd seen him. Jeans, a white t-shirt, and a leather jacket that made him look younger, less formal. When our eyes met across the crowded cafe, he smiled and waved, walking toward me with a confidence that interestingly contrasted with the hesitation I had noticed in him the previous morning. "Sorry I'm late," he said, pulling out the chair across from me. "My shift ran a little longer than I expected." "No problem. I ordered a coffee for you. Double espresso. I figured you'd need it after a day at work." "You guessed right," he laughed, picking up the cup and taking a sip. "Thanks. And thanks also for agreeing to meet outside of, well, my work environment." There was something in his choice of words that suggested more complexity than he was revealing, but I decided not to press it. We were still getting to know each other, testing the limits of what was appropriate to share. We spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing: movies, music, places we had traveled, embarrassing childhood stories. Ryan revealed a dry, intelligent sense of humor that contrasted perfectly with his professional seriousness, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. There was an ease to our interaction that surprised me, as if we had been friends for years instead of near strangers. When the cafe started to empty out and the lights dimmed, Ryan checked his watch and sighed. "I have to go. Double shift tomorrow, so I need to get at least a few hours of sleep." "Of course," I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. We walked out of the cafe together, the Boston night enveloping us with its familiar sounds of traffic and city life. At the corner where our paths would part, Ryan stopped and turned to me. "Marcus, I want you to know that I really enjoyed tonight. It's been a long time since I've had such a relaxing conversation with someone." I enjoyed it too. A lot. We just stood there for a moment, the familiar tension building between us again. There were so many unsaid things hanging in the air, so many questions that neither of us was ready to ask or answer. "Can we do this again?" Ryan asked finally. "Of course, whenever you want." He smiled, and this time there was something different in that smile. More intimate, more promising. "How about Saturday? I know it's weird, but would you like to see where I work? Not officially, of course, but I can show you some places in the city that most people never see. Places that might be interesting photographically." The proposal was unexpected, but intriguing. Ryan was offering to show me Boston through his eyes, to share his professional world in a personal way. That sounds fascinating. "What time? 10 in the morning? I can pick you up if you want." Perfect. This time, when we said goodbye, there was a moment of hesitation before he walked away, as if he wanted to do something more, say something more, but didn't have the courage. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared into the nighttime crowd, with the growing feeling that I was about to dive into something much deeper and more complicated than a simple friendship. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I was excited to find out exactly where this journey would take me. Saturday arrived with a mix of nervousness and anticipation that I hadn't felt in years. Ryan showed up promptly at 10, driving a personal black Jeep instead of the cruiser, dressed in faded jeans and a gray t-shirt that perfectly hugged his torso. When he smiled from the passenger window, something in my chest tightened in a way I wasn't prepared to analyze. "Ready to see Boston from a different angle?" he asked as I got in the car. "Always," I replied, setting my camera on my lap and trying to ignore how the enclosed space of the vehicle intensified his scent. Clean, masculine, with a hint of woody cologne. Ryan took me first to the rooftops of downtown, places accessible only through contacts and commercial building security. From up there, Boston spread out before us like a three-dimensional map, and I spent an hour capturing angles I could never have gotten otherwise. Ryan leaned against the parapet beside me, pointing out historic landmarks and telling stories about incidents he had responded to in different neighborhoods. "You really love this city," I commented, lowering the camera after a particularly good sequence. "Boston is kind of in my blood," he replied, but there was a melancholy in his voice that made me look more closely at his profile. "Sometimes I wonder if I chose to stay here, or if the city chose to keep me." There were layers to that answer that I still didn't understand, but before I could ask more, Ryan was already guiding me to the next location. We spent the afternoon exploring historic alleys in the North End, hidden markets in Chinatown, and finally ended up in a small elevated park in Beacon Hill that offered a perfect view of the harbor at sunset. "How did you find this place?" I asked, setting up my tripod to capture the golden light reflecting on the water. "I come here sometimes when I need to think, escape the pressure of work for a bit." Ryan sat on the grass beside me as I worked, and for the first time since we met, I noticed a real vulnerability in his posture. His shoulders were slightly slumped, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. "It must be tough," I said softly. "Police work, the responsibility, the constant pressure." He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more intimate. "The hardest part isn't the danger or the responsibility. It's always playing a role. Always being what people expect you to be." There was something in the way he said that resonated deeply with me. I lowered the camera and turned completely to face him. "What role do you feel you have to play?" Ryan looked me straight in the eye, and for a moment I saw something there that made me completely forget to breathe. There was an intensity, a raw vulnerability that completely contrasted with the professional confidence he always showed. The perfect son, the exemplary cop, the man my family expects me to be. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living the life other people designed for me, not the one I really want." The brutal honesty of his confession left me speechless for a moment. Here was this strong, respected, seemingly self-assured man, revealing an internal struggle I would have never suspected. "And what life do you really want?" I asked softly. Ryan smiled, but it was a sad smile, heavy with years of repressed questions. "I'm still figuring that out. But being here with you, talking about real things without having to keep up a facade, this feels more true than anything else I've done lately." My heart raced violently. There was something in the way he said it, in the intensity of his gaze, that suggested our connection meant as much to him as it did to me. But there was also a fragility there, as if he were balancing on the edge of an emotional cliff. "Ryan," I started, not sure where I wanted to go with those words. "I know," he interrupted, his voice almost a whisper. "I know this is complicated. My job, my family, the expectations, all of it makes any relationship different, extremely complex. The word relationship hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities and fears. It was the first time either of us had suggested that what was happening between us could be categorized that way. Complicated doesn't mean impossible, I replied, surprising myself with my own courage. Ryan looked at me with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. Slowly, as if moving through water, he reached out and touched my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a gentleness that contrasted with his obvious physical strength. Marcus. He said my name like a prayer, and before either of us could think better of the consequences, our lips met. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if we were both testing whether this was real or just another moment of unresolved tension. But when I felt Ryan respond, his hands moving to the back of my neck, something broke inside me. Years of superficial relationships, of connections that never really mattered, disappeared in an instant. This was different. This was real. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily. Ryan rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed as if he were trying to memorize the moment. "Shit," he whispered, and I didn't know if it was regret or awe. "Regret it?" I asked, my own voice hoarse. "The kiss? Never." He opened his eyes and looked at me directly. "But scared of what this means?" "Absolutely." I understood perfectly. I was terrified too, not just by the intensity of what had happened, but by the implications. Ryan wasn't just any man. He was a cop in a still largely traditional profession, from a family that likely had very specific expectations for his personal life. And me? I was falling for someone who might never be able to publicly own what he was feeling. "We don't have to define this right now," I said finally, though my voice betrayed my own uncertainty. "No," Ryan agreed, but his hands were still on my face, his thumbs caressing my skin as if he couldn't force himself to let go completely. "But we can't pretend it didn't happen either." We spent the rest of the afternoon in a kind of emotional limbo, our dynamic fundamentally altered by the kiss, but both of us carefully avoiding addressing what it meant directly. Ryan showed me a few more photo spots, but now there was an undercurrent of sexual tension in every interaction. When his hands touched mine to help with the equipment, when he leaned over my shoulder to see a photo on the camera's screen, when our eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, it all carried a new, electrifying weight. When Ryan dropped me off at home at the end of the afternoon, the goodbye was strangely formal, as if we were both overcompensating for the intimacy of the moment in the park. But when he said, "I'll see you soon," there was a promise there that made my stomach churn with anticipation. The next few days passed in a fog of emotional confusion. Ryan didn't show up at the port in the following mornings, and I found myself oscillating between worry and irritation. Was he avoiding me, regretting it, or just dealing with his own internal demons? The answer came on Wednesday night when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Marcus? It's Ryan." Just hearing his voice, my heart sped up. "Hey, I was wondering if you were okay. Sorry I haven't been at the port. I've had a complicated few days at work and I needed time to process what happened between us." His honesty was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. "And did you come to any conclusions?" Ryan hesitated for a moment, and I could hear voices in the background. He clearly wasn't at home. "Can I see you tonight? There are some things I need to tell you. Things about my family, my career, complications you should know about before anything." The serious tone of his voice made me nervous, but it also showed a level of honesty and consideration that only increased my attraction to him. "Sure. Want to come to my apartment? I can cook something." That would be great. "What time?" 7. "Perfect. And Marcus? Thanks for being understanding." I spent the next few hours in a state of productive anxiety, cleaning the apartment, preparing a simple dinner, and trying to imagine what complications Ryan needed to discuss. My mind created scenarios ranging from family problems to professional issues that could affect our ability to see each other. Ryan arrived promptly at 7, carrying a bottle of wine and a serious expression that immediately put me on alert. He was wearing casual clothes, but there was a stiffness in his posture that suggested the coming conversation would be difficult. "Smells really good in here," he commented, handing me the wine, but his smile was forced. "Nothing too fancy. Pasta with homemade sauce." I paused, studying his expression. "You seem nervous." "I am." His direct honesty was one of the things I appreciated most about him. "There are things about my life that make any relationship complicated, and you deserve to know that before we get any more involved." We ate dinner in an atmosphere of controlled tension, talking about neutral subjects while we both carefully avoided the elephant in the room. It was only when we finished eating and moved to the couch with glasses of wine that Ryan finally addressed the issue. "My family doesn't know I'm gay," he said without preamble, his words falling like stones into the silence of the apartment. The statement hit me in several ways at once. First, the definitive confirmation that he was, in fact, gay, something I had suspected but had never been verbalized. Second, the understanding of the complications he had mentioned. And third, the enormous weight he had been carrying alone. "How long have you known?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice neutral and supportive. "Always, I suppose, but I really admitted it to myself about 5 years ago." He took a generous sip of wine. "And since then, I've been living a kind of double life. Public versus private. Family versus, well, versus who I really am. It must be exhausting. It is. And it's also why I've never had a real relationship. How can you build something genuine with someone when half your life is based on hiding who you are?" I understood then why our connection had been so intense for him. I represented not just romantic attraction, but the possibility of authenticity in a life that had been largely performative. "And your job?" I asked. "Oh, that's a whole other territory of complexity." Ryan laughed bitterly. "The police force isn't exactly known for its diversity and inclusion, especially in Boston. There are a few openly gay officers, but they face challenges, comments, exclusion from certain operations, constant questioning of their ability to do the job properly." I began to understand the magnitude of what Ryan was facing. It wasn't just a matter of personal or family acceptance. His career, his financial security, his position in the community, all of it would potentially be at risk if he decided to live openly. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. Ryan looked at me directly, and there was a raw vulnerability in his eyes that made me hold my breath. "Because for the first time in my life, I've met someone who makes me want to risk all of that. Someone who makes me question if living a lie is worth the security it offers." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The intensity of the feelings he was expressing was overwhelming, but also terrifying. Did I want this responsibility? To be the person who could potentially bring someone's carefully constructed life crashing down? "Ryan," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm just being honest about where I am emotionally, and about the obstacles we would face if we decided to explore this." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his revelation hanging between us. Finally, I reached out and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. "Thank you for trusting me," I said softly. "I know it couldn't have been easy to share that." Ryan squeezed my hand, and when our eyes met, there was a gratitude there that made me realize I was probably the first person he had told the whole truth to. "There's one more thing," he said hesitantly. I waited, bracing myself for another difficult revelation. "I would really like to kiss you again, but this time it wouldn't be an impulse. It would be a conscious choice, knowing exactly what it could mean." My response was to lean in and press my lips against his, definitively answering his unasked question. This time, when we kissed, it was with full awareness of the complications, the risks, the uncertainties that awaited us. And yet, or perhaps because of it, it was even more intense. When we finally pulled apart, Ryan rested his forehead against mine again, his eyes closed. "So, we're really doing this?" he whispered. "I think we've been doing it for a while now," I replied. "We're just admitting it now." Ryan smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him all night. "So, I suppose that makes us, what, secret boyfriends?" "For now," I said, and there was an implicit promise in those words that we both understood, even if we weren't ready to verbalize it yet. The weeks that followed were an emotional roller coaster of stolen moments and constant tension. Ryan and I developed a carefully orchestrated routine of secret meetings. Dinners at my apartment when he wasn't on duty. Casual walks through distant parks where it was unlikely we'd run into anyone he knew. And coded text messages that anyone reading would interpret as conversations about photography or everyday matters. The physical intensity between us grew exponentially with each encounter. It started with long kisses on my couch, hands exploring previously uncharted territories, whispers of desire that filled the silence of my apartment. Ryan revealed a surprising passion beneath his controlled facade. When he finally allowed himself to relax, his need was almost desperate, as if he were making up for years of repression in every touch, every caress. But it was the emotional vulnerability that really undid me. In the moments after our intimate encounters, Ryan would become almost childlike in his need for reassurance, repeatedly asking if I was sure about what we were doing, if I fully understood the risks involved. I always responded the same way, by kissing him softly and reminding him that my choice was being made with my eyes wide open. The first real sign of trouble came on a Thursday afternoon. Ryan had spent the previous night at my apartment, and in the morning I had watched him put on his uniform, transforming back into Officer Williams before leaving. A few hours later, my phone rang with a tense call. "Martinez is asking questions," Ryan said without preamble when I answered. Martinez was Ryan's partner, a veteran cop I only knew through the stories Ryan told. Apparently, an observant man with sharp instincts developed over 2 decades of police work. "What kind of questions?" "About my schedule, where I've been spending my free time, why I'm more distracted lately." Ryan paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. He commented today that I seemed different these past few weeks. Lighter, is how he put it, and he wants to know why. My stomach clenched. We had been so careful, but apparently not careful enough to escape the trained eye of an experienced cop. "What did you say?" "That I've been going to the gym regularly, eating better, trying to take better care of my mental health." His voice was heavy with obvious tension. "But Martinez isn't an idiot, Marcus. He knows when someone is lying, and he definitely knows when someone is hiding something." That night, when Ryan came to my apartment, the pressure was clearly getting to him. He was more tense, more paranoid, constantly checking his phone and jumping at the slightest noise. During dinner, he barely touched his food, lost in thoughts that were clearly not pleasant. "Ryan," I said finally, covering his hand with mine on the table, "you're torturing yourself." "Maybe because I should be," he replied bitterly. "Maybe this is all a huge mistake that's going to blow up in my face." The pain in his voice cut me deeply. I stood up, walked around the table, and positioned myself behind his chair, massaging his tense shoulders. "Or maybe," I said softly, "it's the first truly honest thing you've done in years." Ryan leaned his head back, resting it against my chest, and sighed deeply. "How do you make it sound so simple?" "Because for me, it is simple." I kissed the top of his head. "I don't have a career that depends on public approval. I don't have a family with rigid expectations. My life is mine, to live as I please. Sometimes I'm jealous of that freedom, and sometimes I'm jealous of your family connection, even if it's complicated." That night, we made love with a desperate intensity that reflected both our passion and our fears for the future. Ryan held me as if I might disappear, whispering my name like a prayer between kisses that tasted of salt and need. When we finished, we were both trembling, not from the cold, but from the emotional magnitude of what we were sharing. "I love you," Ryan whispered in the dark, his voice so low I almost missed the words. My heart stopped completely for a moment before restarting at triple speed. "I love you too," I replied, and it was the first time either of us had verbalized what had become obvious weeks before. We stayed up late that night, talking about possible futures, about how we might navigate the intensifying complications. Ryan talked about the possibility of transferring to another department, maybe in another city where he could start fresh. I talked about the flexibility of my freelance career, how I could work from anywhere. They were hypothetical conversations, but charged with real possibility. The turning point came 2 weeks later, in a completely unexpected way. Ryan was in the middle of his shift when he got a call for a domestic disturbance in Southie. Ironically, just 3 blocks from the house where he had grown up. When he and Martinez arrived on the scene, they found it was a gay couple being attacked by homophobic neighbors who had discovered their sexual orientation. Ryan told me the story that night, his voice trembling with anger, and something I took a moment to identify as determination. "They were 2 men in their 40s, been together for 15 years, he said, pacing nervously around my apartment. "Living quietly, not bothering anyone. And then some idiots found out about them and decided that was reason enough to vandalize their property and make death threats." "That's terrible," I replied, watching his growing agitation. "But that's not the worst part." Ryan stopped pacing and looked at me directly. The worst part was seeing the fear in their eyes when Martinez and I arrived. They were terrified that we, the police, wouldn't take them seriously. Or worse, that we'd share the feelings of their attackers. "And did you take them seriously?" Martinez was incredible. Completely professional. Treated them with total dignity. Processed the scene like any other hate crime. Ryan paused. And when we were walking back to the cruiser, he made a comment that completely shocked me. I waited, sensing we were getting to the crux of the story. He said, You know, Williams, any cop who has a problem with gay people living their lives in peace probably shouldn't be wearing this uniform. Our job is to protect all citizens, not judge their personal choices. My heart sped up. And did you say anything back? I said I completely agreed. And then Martinez looked at me with that look of his, the one that says he knows more than he's letting on, and said, I'm glad to hear that. Because honestly, if you were the kind of guy who had a problem with it, it'd be pretty weird considering you've obviously been gay for months. I was speechless. He said that? Exactly that. Ryan laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. Apparently Martinez noticed weeks ago. The way I've been happier, more relaxed, more myself. He said whoever the person is who's making me smile like that must be pretty special. And did you tell him about us? Not specifically. But, yeah, I admitted that I'm seeing someone who means a lot to me. Ryan sat down next to me on the couch, taking my hands. And you know what was most surprising? The relief I felt saying it. Even if it was partial, even without details, to finally be able to tell someone I work with that I'm in love. It was liberating. That night, our conversation took a different turn. Instead of talking about the obstacles and complications, we started discussing real possibilities. Ryan talked about other officers he suspected were gay or lesbian, but who were also living secret lives. We talked about the difference between being discreet by choice versus hiding out of fear. I don't need to go around announcing my personal life, Ryan said, lying with his head on my chest. But I also don't want to actively lie about who I am anymore. And I definitely don't want to pretend you don't exist in my life anymore. What does that mean practically? It means maybe it's time to test the waters. Start slow. Maybe tell my sister Jessica first. She's always been the most open-minded in the family, and I suspect she wouldn't be shocked. He paused. And maybe you could meet her? The suggestion made me simultaneously thrilled and terrified. Meeting Ryan's family would be a huge step, a real statement that our relationship had a long-term future. Are you sure you're ready for that? No, Ryan answered honestly. But I'm also not sure I'll ever be completely ready. And in the meantime, I'm wasting precious time living in the shadows when I could be living in the sunlight with the person I love. 2 weeks later, Ryan arranged a casual meeting with Jessica at a cafe in Back Bay. I was too nervous to eat anything, but Jessica turned out to be exactly as Ryan had described. Warm, smart, and apparently not at all surprised when Ryan, somewhat awkwardly, explained that I was more than a friend. Finally, was her first reaction, followed by a laugh that was pure joy. Ryan, honey, anyone with eyes could see you were in love. And Marcus, she turned to me with a radiant smile. Thank you for making my brother smile again. I haven't seen him like this in years. The relief on Ryan's face was palpable. When Jessica hugged us goodbye, she whispered in his ear, Mom and Dad will need time, but they'll come around. What matters is that you're happy. That night, Ryan stayed at my apartment, and for the first time since we met, he seemed genuinely at peace. There was no tension in his shoulders, no nervous glances at his phone, no constant vigilance that had become his trademark. How do you feel? I asked, watching him relax on my couch with a beer. Like I can breathe for the first time in years, he answered. And scared as hell, but a good kind of scared. The kind of fear that comes from doing something important, not from hiding something shameful. In the months that followed, Ryan continued the gradual process of coming out, first to other family members, then to close friends, and finally to a few select co-workers. Not all the reactions were positive, but most were better than he had feared. His father took longer to come around, but even he eventually accepted it with a kind of respectful resignation that acknowledged his inability to change the situation and his refusal to lose his son over it. At work, Ryan found that his paranoia had been partly unfounded. Yes, there were some comments, some bad jokes, some colleagues who started treating him differently. But there was also support, from Martinez obviously, but also from other officers who turned out to be more progressive than Ryan had expected. 6 months after our first kiss in the park, Ryan took me back to the same spot. It was a Saturday morning, and the view of the harbor was particularly beautiful in the soft, late winter light. I thought it was just nostalgia, a silent celebration of how far we had come since that first moment of real connection. But when Ryan knelt on the grass, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, I realized I had completely underestimated his intentions. Marcus Thompson, he said, his voice trembling slightly. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You taught me that living authentically isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. And I don't want to spend another day pretending you're not the most important thing in my life. My vision blurred, my heart beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Will you marry me? Will you build a real life with me? A life we don't have to hide from anyone?" My response was to throw myself into his arms, kissing him with all the passion, gratitude, and love that had built up over the months of uncertainty and growth. When I could finally speak, through tears I didn't know I was crying, it was to whisper, "Yes," against his lips. We got married 4 months later, in a small but perfect ceremony at the same port where Ryan used to watch me take pictures before he even approached me that fateful night. Martinez was the best man, Jessica was the maid of honor, and even Ryan's parents were there, his mother crying openly with emotion while his father tried to maintain a stoic expression that couldn't quite hide his pride. During our honeymoon in Europe, Ryan confessed something that made me laugh and cry at the same time. He had started noticing my presence at the port weeks before he pulled me over for speeding. There was something about the way I captured the morning stillness that fascinated him, and he had started scheduling his patrols specifically to coincide with my photography times. "So you pulled me over on purpose that night?" I asked, incredulous. "Not exactly," Ryan laughed, kissing my neck as we watched the sunset over Rome. "You really were speeding, but maybe I was a little more vigilant about traffic enforcement in that specific area than I normally would be." "So our love story started with police abuse of power?" "Our love story started with fate," he corrected, pulling me closer. "I just gave the universe a little helping hand. Today, 2 years later, we share a larger apartment in the North End, with an office where I work and a small workshop where Ryan is exploring his own passion for photography that he discovered through me. He's still a cop, but now he lives openly, serving as an informal mentor to other young LGBTQ+ officers who are dealing with the same issues he faced. Sometimes, when I wake up in the morning and see Ryan getting ready for work, putting on the same uniform that made him seem so unattainable when we first met, I still can't quite believe this is my life, that a routine traffic stop turned into something so profound and transformative. But then he kisses me before he leaves, whispers, "I love you," like he does every morning. And I remember that sometimes the best stories start in the most unexpected places, with the people we least expect to change our lives forever. What you're hearing is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. And if you've made it this far on this journey with us, thank you for following our story. If it touched you in any way, if it made you believe a little more in the power of true love, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part moved you the most. See you in the next story, everyone.